Welcome back to Revenue Optimization Radio. Daily show hosted by Patrick Morrissey, CMO of Altify, the sales transformation company. So let's get things rolling with Patrick and his guest. Hey, Patrick.
Oh, good morning. How are you?
I'm good. How are you doing today, sir?
I am doing well, and I'm prepared to talk about sales velocity, and I've got a triple threat expert to get us into the details of, how to sell smarter, how to sell faster, and sell more effectively.
Okay, well, I'm looking forward to all three. I'm looking forward to all three.
And thanks to everybody who's joining us either live here at revenueoptimizationradio.com or picking us up on Stitcher or iTunes or wherever you get your podcast. I'm excited today to talk to somebody who's got a front row seat at a conversation that I think is important to everybody. It's arguably critically important to high growth companies, but there's no company selling anything in the complex B2B world that's not looking at how do I move faster and how do I sell more effectively. And I'm pleased to welcome Scott Barker to the program. Scott, good morning.
Good morning, Patrick. Thanks for having me.
I purposely just wanted to welcome you before I laid out your triple threat title here because, guests at the show who do one thing, you appear to do three things at least simultaneously. You both lead partnerships for Sales Hacker. You're also an evangelist at outreach.com. And it sounds like on your third shift, you're also, the GM of Vancouver Enterprise. Give us a little bit of background on you and what you're up to. And for the audience who may not be familiar with one or all three of those things, give us a little bit of context on you.
Absolutely. So, I try and stay busy when I can. A little bit about me. So I started the first kind of role that kicked this all off was head of partnerships, which is essentially head of revenue at a company called Sales Hacker. Sales Hacker were the largest B2B community and media house for B2B sales professionals really on the planet. And it was formed about 5 years ago. And we put on large global conferences in London, San Francisco, New York. Of course, we push out 2 to 3 contributor-led blog posts a week. We have our very own Sales Hacker podcast, and we do 2 webinars each and every week. And it's really all in the name of spreading modern selling practices, new technology to the world of sales. And a year ago, as I was on that journey building out Sales Hacker, Outreach actually acquired us to really help us on that mission. So then I became an evangelist, and I'm actually part of the marketing team over at Outreach. For those who are not familiar with Outreach, it's the market-leading sales engagement platform. We're a software solution that's going to automate a lot of the mundane tasks that your sellers are doing and really allow your sellers to, A, stand out, B, focus on what matters, and third, ultimately just sell easier. About 8 years ago, anyway, in my eyes, the CRM became table stakes, right? For any revenue team.
Right.
And
absolutely.
That's just the way it is. Anyone who didn't have a CRM 8 years ago, you were behind. And I think we're currently there right now with sales engagement. So it's a very exciting time to be a part of Outreach because I believe, having led sales teams in the past, having led business development teams in the past, if your revenue team doesn't have a sales engagement platform right now, I think you're doing them a disservice and you'll get left behind pretty quickly.
Well, and I think you could argue there that you're also doing your customers, your prospects a disservice if you're just bombarding them with spam mail or, pounding the phones, hoping to get a result. That's not helpful to you and it's not helpful to the client. So let's take a step back for a second and give us a context of, as one of the fast growing companies, but also one of your sweet spots at Outreach, and certainly going back to the Sales Hacker element of this, everybody's interested in what good looks like in modern selling. Mm-hmm. And how do you activate the entire revenue team? When you're out talking to the market, you're talking to customers, prospects, you're holding these events, whether it's live or it's the virtual events like the webinars or whatever. What are the most common challenges that you hear back from the Office of Marketing or the Office of Sales? What are companies that are on a growth trajectory really struggling with?
Mm-hmm. I think I'll answer that question twofold. I'll first talk through some of the challenges that we're having at Outreach right now, because Outreach, we're scaling extremely fast. So we're experiencing some of those challenges firsthand. And then I'll speak to some of these other challenges that I see the market is having. On the outreach side, right now, one of the challenges that's very top of mind to me, because I just jumped out of a meeting with our PMMs about it, is understanding how our messaging has to grow up as we begin to grow up. You know, we've been extremely lucky that we've actually been pulled up market. We had people come to us, big enterprise companies, and be like, hey, we need a solution like this. So we got pulled up market. And now as our client roster gets larger, the company size gets larger, we need to adapt and start to be able to speak their language in everything that we do as a company. That's one of the ones that really sticks out in my mind right now, and something that we're working through currently. Then when I look at the other side, and this is outreach, we work with the likes of Cloudera, DocuSign, Sacramento Kings, Pendo. You know, on Sales Hacker, we work with Salesforce, Adobe, Gong, Drift, a lot of these fast-growing companies. Really unique position. Like yourself, I host a podcast. I moderate 2 webinars a week. So over the last 2 years, although I'm not a CMO or a CRO, I've interviewed hundreds and hundreds of execs from a lot of these really fast-growing companies. The 2 that I've been able to tease out over the last couple of months that seem to be reoccurring themes are twofold. So number one is alignment. This is kind of the age-old struggle of alignment of their revenue teams and making sure that sales, marketing, and ops have the same North Star. The only thing I'd add to that is a lot of these companies, at least the ones that are kind of ahead of the curve, are now talking not only alignment, but true immersion and integration. So that's a really interesting conversation that I'm seeing come up. And then the second one is diversity and inclusion while growing at hyper speed. I think diversity and inclusion should be top of mind for everyone, but it poses unique problems when you need seats filled, like you need them yesterday, you know? So I would say those are 2 examples that I see organizations struggling with kind of again and again.
That's interesting. I want to drill into both of those topics because I think there's some crossover there, but they are 2 different vectors of similar problems when you start to talk about growth. And that first one around alignment is interesting to me because as a general rule, when you encounter an organization, or I think when I encounter CROs, CMOs, executive leaders, the bias now, and back to your dialogue and your open around the importance of CRM, and we end up talking more about CRO. The best companies are all about everybody's in sales, which sounds great from the CEO chair. It's much harder in real life. Where does the friction, where does this break apart in terms of that notion of alignment, in your experience and what you've encountered with the folks you've interviewed as well as the clients that you're dealing with?
I think oftentimes what it's spurred from is not sharing the same KPIs. I think that's what I see time and time again. Maybe marketing has a lead goal that they're held to, and then sales has obviously a revenue target, and then ops is somewhere in the middle trying to make that all more efficient. And I think that's where a lot of the frustration can come from. And you actually have 2 different teams running 2 different races, which those races will ultimately have different finish lines, and sometimes you won't like those finish lines.
Yeah, to put it mildly, or sometimes there's a lot of cycles being run simultaneously, and everybody's doing the thing for the right reasons. At least they believe, according to their personal metrics and their team's metrics. But those are not necessarily on track to the purposes of what's good for the customer.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of points to what you were talking about earlier in terms of what does good look like in modern selling. And when you advance that conversation into the team or the people element, I think that's where the diversity issue comes to life. So give us a little bit of color from your seat when you're seeing diversity and you're talking about opportunities with diversity as well as challenges with diversity. Where's the friction or where are the sticking points here?
The opportunity is endless now, right? There's tons of studies now out there. We work closely with Women Sales Pros that just released a bunch of really cool information on it's no longer even up for debate. More diverse teams, more diverse school of thought is the way to go. It's not only the right thing to do, it's now the the smart thing to do. So the opportunities I see are endless. Where it poses challenges in my eyes, and this can be a tricky topic, but it's when you are growing so fast and I still have my revenue targets that I have to hit. We've still got our quarterly goals. And I have told my board, or I have told my leader, hey, we're going to make these 4 hires. And you get a slew of candidates that come in, and, you know, by nature of what has happened in the past, some of them will all fit a certain demographic, unfortunately. And maybe there'll be some that are also A players that are like, hey, we could add this person would have an impact. But when we talk about diversity and inclusion, we need to make sure that we are taking a step back and making sure that we're having fair representation from gender, from backgrounds, from school of thought, and making sure that we actually sometimes have to slow down in order to level the playing field and get enough fair representation from all of those avenues so that we can make an inclusive decision on who we're going to go ahead and hire.
And the other element of that is looking at that over time. Like the example you used, I think illustrates where some of the potential sticking points are, is we're focused on, hey, do we have some diversity in these next 4 hires? But it's not the next 4, it's the next 10 and the next 40 and the next 400, looking at a broader range of bringing skills, experiences, backgrounds. And I've had a couple folks on the podcast, well, Tracy Eiler, who's part of Women in Revenue, who's got some great stats talking about women's ability to outperform men on 1-to-1. And we've seen the same thing at Altify. We did our own study. And recently I talked to Andrew Buckley, who's the CRO at Traction on Demand, and he talked about his top sales performers being women.
Yeah.
And not that that's an element of diversity. That's not the only element of diversity, but it caused them to start to rethink hiring practices and policies and measurement and programs to help coach and enable teams, because the results are right there. That, greater diversity, starting with let's get more women, particularly in technology sales, where you and I probably spend an inordinate amount of our time. Having more of those roles filled by women, because that's the key. That's the first level, I think, or the starter in terms of diversity, that it's not the old boys club anymore.
Couldn't agree more. And shout out Traction on Demand. Love those guys. Those are a great Vancouver company, where my hometown.
Exactly. They are your people, and they are my people as well. But if you think about those two elements, whether it's diversity or it is really thinking more holistically about aligning everybody to drive growth, are there companies that stick out to you as, best in class, or examples of companies that you think are bringing these and other elements together that are helping them scale and outperform in the market? And what does that look like from your perspective? Yeah.
So from a diversity perspective, it's funny because they're actually competitors, but they're both doing a great job at it, is Gong and Chorus, who play in the conversational intelligence space. I'm lucky enough to know a few members of both their executive teams, and I know that they put a big onus on, like I mentioned, actually slowing down to make sure that they're getting fair representation. And then once those people are in, they need to feel supported, and not only supported, but also celebrated and included. So they have a lot of ongoing initiatives for people of all backgrounds, which I really like.
Yeah, and I think that's interesting that you call out Gong and Chorus, because two good companies, but also I think sometimes best practices feed on each other. I would argue that some of the best thing that could happen for you at a stage of growth is have somebody who you really admire and compete very hard against, because it makes everybody better. And ultimately, the customers win.
Totally. And to that point, we actually just recently did a webinar with Salesforce, which, again, to that point, Salesforce puts so much onus into their diversity programs and all this that it kind of elevates the entire industry as a whole. So I think that's a great point. I think if you lead by example, your competitors and those who compete with you will follow.
Totally agree. And as an ex-Salesforce, I had a lot of love for the Ohana, but more importantly, I think more than just investing in the programs and the people, they put their money where their mouth is in terms of making sure that there's consistency in pay and a whole variety of other things, including taking stands on public policy and diversity issues. So that's goodness. Let's pick up this conversation, but we'll pause for a second. We're talking to Scott Barker today, who is head of partnerships for Sales Hacker, as well as an evangelist for outreach. We'll pause for a quick minute to pay the bills, and we'll come right back.
You're only as successful as your customers, and that demands the need for an exceptional sales execution, revenue retention, and customer success. The challenge for most sales leaders and their teams, however, is that their sales process just doesn't match how their customers buy. Sustained growth isn't possible because the revenue team isn't aligned with customers and prospects. With Altify's sales transformation solutions, companies can deliver predictable revenue growth. Yes, we said predictable revenue growth. They can also acquire and retain customers, and they can collaborate across the revenue team to qualify and win new business while delivering value that unlocks cross-sell and upsell opportunities. Built natively on the Salesforce platform, Altify helps salespeople, managers, and executives achieve sustained revenue growth. They help accelerate sales performance for Autodesk, Comcast, GE, Honeywell, Salesforce, Tableau, and United Healthcare. They can do the same for you. Visit Altify.com, just like it sounds, Altify, Altify.com.
And welcome back. We're talking today with Scott Barker. He heads up all things partnership for the Sales Hacker community, as well as he's an evangelist and crime fighter for Outreach.io, and he's a Vancouver guy and focused on enterprise selling there. And when we left off, Scott, you mentioned earlier, a couple core components that you thought were important in terms of scaling and driving, particularly in growth companies, which were both alignment and diversity. And I want to rewind back to the alignment aspect for a second, because one of the challenges that often when I'm interviewing either folks on this program or I'm out talking to customers and prospects in the Altify world that comes up all the time is we're trying to get something done, but we're not speaking the same language. And the organization is not necessarily able to, more is not more. Fundamentally, for best efforts, a lot of resource, a lot of investment in trying to drive growth and trying to drive higher revenue performance. At a certain point, it hits the wall because you can't just brute force it. And when you dig a little deeper, what you find is sometimes there's a little bit of a disconnect between the strategy and the process with the tools and technology. One of the things I have observed is that sometimes there's a real challenge that even the apps and the integrations, even best efforts from a management level driving down across the entirety of the organization, break down in the technology, which really points to the need to have more of a holistic ecosystem approach. How do you think about the role of the ecosystem, and particularly where outreach in the sales engagement space? How does that connect to other things that your clients are using, and how do you help drive the right kind of results for your customers?
We're very, very invested at Outreach into our suite of integration. So we announced this year something called the Outreach Galaxy, which is essentially us being at the nucleus of all these best-in-class systems. So whatever it is, whether it's conversational intelligence, revenue optimization, chatbots, these new direct mail companies like Sendoso, sales enablement platforms, whatever it is, we want to act as that single pane of glass where you have all of these systems that are talking to each other, that are running your revenue operations, and it can all kind of live in one house. You can do all of your plays in one. And that's, of course, going to help the leaders of your organization. And you said it can, sometimes when you have your leaders or your managers and they've got their goals, sometimes they don't see the whole picture, right? And that's why I see this importance of revenue operations, which we're seeing become more and more popular within my world anywhere of B2B SaaS. And I'm going to steal this analogy from one of our RevOps leaders that she recently used. It's about, so there's this airport in Florida, and it's one of the smallest airports in the world. And there's about 4 planes that land in this airport every day. At that airport, they can basically have one radio, talk to the guy on the ground. They can visually see it. And then he puts up a green or a red flag, and then they land the plane, right?
Right.
That's okay. So you think of your startup and you're right across maybe the desk from your counterpart in marketing or your counterpart in operations. And the feedback loop is so small and so short. Okay, we can land the plane. And then there's SeaTac, Seattle's airport, that has, it's like 10 to 40,000 flights in and out of there a day. It's absurd. And there's all of these people. You've got the air control towers. and you're in constant communication from when the plane leaves the destination to when they arrive, right? Constant communication. You have insight into every minute of every second of everything that they're doing. And I look at those as the parallels of, when you grow up as an organization and you see all these new functions sprout up, your teams get larger, you're going to need revenue operations. You're going to need that extra layer of people that are watching everything at every stage to make sure that you're fully optimized and ready to rock. And you're, in this analogy, you're not going to bump into one of the other 10,000 planes, which in the SaaS ecosystem is just 10,000 challenges that are out there, right? That we each face every day.
Totally. And that's a great analogy. And while you were talking about that, I was thinking, well, at least things get in and out of SeaTac. But if you go to O'Hare or Hartsfield this time of year, like when the clouds come in, you can get crushed by a rainstorm. And there's a whole bunch of other environmental factors as well, that the bigger the scale, the harder this problem is, and arguably the more critical it is. So I love that analogy. If people listening are looking for more information on how to drill into either the alignment and scale topic or the diversity topic, where do you send them? What should they do?
Absolutely. So we are actually, because these topics, I basically got sick of people bringing them up so often. So I wanted to approach them head on. We're actually doing a 2-part webinar series on Sales Hacker. We're interviewing 3 people who are actually much smarter than I am. We have yourself, Pat Morrissey, CMO. We have Anna Baird, who is the COO at Outreach, an amazing operations leader. And Nadia Rashid, who is the VP of Sales at Seismic. And we've got all those 3 people together in a room. We're doing a 2-part webinar series just on this. It's on alignment. And the second part will be on diversity. So tackling these big issues. It did take a long time to get these executives' calendars to line up, but we made it happen. And if you want to check it out, just go to revenue.team/podcast711. So that's revenue.team/podcast711. Definitely check it out. I'm personally extremely excited for the conversation.
Fantastic. And I know you've got a lot of crime to fight and podcasts and driving that diversity. I'm looking forward to joining that discussion as well. But, bringing it back to you for a second, Scott, as a practitioner and somebody right in the middle of growing the company, growing the Sales Hacker community, et cetera, give me an example of somebody from your background or that you've worked for, you've worked with, you've seen up close, that's a great revenue leader. And what lesson did you take away from them that helps you on a day-to-day basis?
I'll try and sneak 2 in there. I've been extremely lucky in my career to be surrounded by some fantastic leaders. The first one that comes to mind is Max Altschuler, who had a big hand in my career to date, who's the founder and CEO of Sales Hacker, now the VP of Marketing at Outreach. And he taught me many things, but one was definitely, and we're going to go back to a plane analogy, I just can't get enough of them. He had this idea in a lot of, basically everything that we did, is that the plane doesn't have to be fully built before you take off. You can actually build it as you go. And his thinking, which I now have come to agree with, is it's actually advantageous to do so. Now, maybe not in a real airplane, definitely not in a real airplane, but when you're moving forward in business, there's more data coming at you. Therefore, you're going to have a more informed building process. To go back to the plane, you can see the mountains, so maybe you build your wings differently so you can get above them. So same kind of thing. And then last one, Anna Baird and Manny Medina, that's the COO and CEO at Outreach. I've never met 2 individuals that live leading from the front more than they do. I swear Manny would still make 40 cold calls a day if we let him.
Well, and you got to appreciate that when that's your role. Scott, I really want to thank you for your time, for your insight. Looking forward to getting on the podcast and talking shop with Seismic and with Outreach shortly. And with that, we'll cut it off right here and leave you on to go drive some modern sales selling and some best practice.
Awesome. Thanks, Patrick.
You bet. Have a great day.